Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, walking into your bathroom, picking up your toothbrush, and suddenly realizing you have, like, absolutely no idea what to do with it.
Oh, wow. Just a total blank.
Right. You just stare at this plastic stick with bristles. You have to consciously think about, how to grip the handle without dropping it.
Yeah.
You have to calculate the exact amount of physical pressure required to squeeze the toothpaste tube without creating this massive mess all over the counter.
Trying to visualize processing all those individual sensory inputs and motor commands simultaneously, it just sounds paralyzing.
It sounds incredibly exhausting, and that sense of profound, overwhelming exhaustion is exactly why we are here. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to uncover the hidden programming that is driving almost half of everything you do.
Yeah, we're pulling from some really fascinating research on the architecture of human behavior, basically looking at the foundational mechanics of how we operate.
Exactly. We want to understand not just what our habits are, but the underlying mechanisms of, why they form, how they solidify, and how they ultimately dictate your daily reality.
Right. And to wrap our heads around this, we first have to establish a baseline definition, because the research we're looking at, specifically this excerpt from Lesson 1, frames a habit in a very specific way.
Yeah, it defines it as behavior repeated so frequently that it bypasses conscious choice entirely. It just becomes completely automatic.
And that transition from a conscious choice to an automatic execution, that is the crux of the entire phenomenon. It is literally a biological migration.
A migration.
Yeah, an action moves from being something you actively deliberate over to something your body simply executes on command.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the research points out something that feels a bit counterintuitive at first, which is that your brain actually loves habits. It craves them.
Oh, absolutely.
And the fundamental reason for this craving is just energy conservation. When I was looking over the data, it instantly made me think of, like, the operating system on a smartphone.
Okay, I like that.
You know how a phone is constantly running calculations in the background to manage battery life? It puts unused apps to sleep. It automatically dims the screen when the ambient light changes.
Right, yeah.
And it relies heavily on cache data, like saving images and website layouts locally, so it doesn't have to expend the energy to download them fresh from the internet every single time you open a page.
That makes a lot of sense.
It runs all these invisible background processes to ensure the battery doesn't just, drain to zero by noon.
That smartphone analogy actually mirrors the biological mechanics perfectly. Because the human brain is a massive, relentless consumer of energy.
It really is.
Yeah. Even though it only makes up about 2% of your total body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your body's glucose and oxygen.
Wow. 20%.
Yeah. It is an incredibly expensive organ to run. So from a strictly evolutionary and survival standpoint, your brain cannot afford to run at maximum processing capacity all the time.
It would just burn out.
Exactly. It is aggressively, constantly seeking efficiency. It wants to find the cognitive off-ramp.
Which brings us right back to that exhausting toothbrush scenario.
Yes. If you had to consciously navigate the micro decisions of brushing your teeth every single morning, your brain's energy reserves would be severely depleted.
Right.
If every mundane action required the engagement of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex problem solving and conscious thought, you would be in trouble.
Just tying your shoes would be a nightmare.
Tying your shoes, navigating your kitchen to make coffee, turning the doorknob to leave your house. If all of that required active deliberation, your cognitive battery would be blinking red before you even started your commute.
You wouldn't have the processing power left for actual survival threats or, like, creative problem solving. So the habit is literally just the brain's cached data. It's downloading the sequence once, so it never has to expend the bandwidth to download it again.
Right. And without those neural shortcuts, everyday life would be unbearably slow. You'd be perpetually stuck on the loading screen of your own life, trying to figure out how to walk down a flight of stairs.
That's a great way to put it.
The automaticity, the caching of these behaviors, is the only thing that frees up your higher cognitive functions to focus on the novel, unpredictable things in your environment that actually demand your attention.
And, that biological imperative makes complete sense. We have to conserve energy to survive. But moving from the neuroscience into the messy reality of our day-to-day lives, the data gets very specific about what these cached shortcuts actually look like.
It does.
And honestly, the variety of the behaviors that fall under this umbrella is a bit staggering.
What's fascinating here is how the underlying mechanism applies to such a wildly diverse spectrum of human behavior. When you synthesize the examples provided in the source text, you realize that the brain's caching system just doesn't discriminate based on the type of activity.
Like, we aren't just talking about nervous tics, right? Like biting your nails or tapping your foot.
Far from it. The research points to things like brushing your teeth, which is a complex series of motor skills and physical hygiene. Then you have locking your front door as you leave, which is a security-based muscle memory.
Right.
You have the morning cup of coffee, which involves chemical consumption and a physiological craving.
Definitely have that one.
Yeah, and you have the modern urge to check social media the moment you wake up, which is a digital dopamine loop.
Yeah.
And then you have saying thank you when someone hands you something, which is a purely verbal social reflex.
Okay, wait. I have to pause and push back on grouping all of these together because lumping a polite social reflex in with a digital compulsion feels like a false equivalence to me.
Okay, how so?
Well, does saying thank you truly operate on the exact same automatic energy-saving brain circuitry as grabbing my phone to check Facebook the absolute second I open my eyes? To me, they just feel fundamentally different.
I can see that.
Saying thank you feels like an expression of my character, you know? It's tied to my upbringing and my conscious values. Reaching for the glowing rectangle before I'm even fully awake feels like an unwanted pop-up ad in my brain. It feels intrusive.
I understand why you'd want to separate them, yeah. Because subjectively, the emotional experience of those two actions is completely different. One aligns with your self-image, and the other probably causes a bit of friction or guilt.
Exactly.
But if we strip away the subjective emotion and look strictly at the neurological hardware, we have to recognize that the basal ganglia, the part of the brain where these automatic routines are stored, it just does not have a moral compass.
It doesn't care.
It doesn't evaluate character at all. It only recognizes patterns.
It just sees a loop that can be automated to save power.
That is the sole objective. To your brain's energy conservation system, a stimulus is just a trigger, and a response is just a sequence of actions.
Wow.
Let's look at the mechanics of the social scenario you mentioned. The stimulus is receiving a service like someone hands you a coffee or holds an elevator door. The automatic response is the phrase, thank you.
Right.
You aren't pausing to engage your prefrontal cortex. You aren't analyzing the power dynamics of the interaction, considering the historical context of gratitude and carefully formulating a linguistic response. You just output the phrase.
Because doing all that social and historical analysis would burn glucose. It would cost energy.
And your brain hates spending energy unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Now apply that exact same mechanistic logic to the digital scenario.
Okay.
The stimulus is the physiological state of waking up, or simply the visual cue of the phone sitting on the nightstand. The automatic response is the physical movement of the arm, the swiping of the screen, and the opening of the app.
It's the exact same process.
In both the social and the digital scenario, the brain recognized a familiar pattern. It basically noted, I have been in this exact environment thousands of times before. I know the behavioral sequence that usually follows this trigger. I will bypass the conscious decision-making center entirely and just run the executable file.
It just runs the file. That is wild. I mean, it really levels the playing field of our behavior.
It does.
Whether the trigger is a chemical craving, the color-coded design of an app, or basic societal etiquette, the brain is just endlessly hunting for the nearest off-ramp into automaticity.
It wants to put the active thinking part of you on standby as frequently as possible.
And that biological drive to put us on standby brings us to the sheer scale of this phenomenon. Because the research doesn't just define how these habits form, it quantifies them.
Yeah, this is where it gets real.
And frankly, the number they attach to this completely recontextualizes how you view your own agency.
The data on this is incredibly humbling.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers estimate that roughly 40 to 45% of our daily actions are habitual rather than conscious decisions.
Just let the weight of that percentage sink in. Nearly half.
The direct implication of that statistic is that nearly half of your waking life is lived on autopilot. I mean, think about your day-to-day right up to the moment you started listening to this deep dive.
Yeah, trace it back.
If this data holds true, almost half of the things you've done, the specific route you took to work, the filler words you used in a meeting, the way you tied your shoes, the posture you're sitting in right now, they weren't actually choices you actively made today.
No, they weren't.
They were choices you made months or even years ago that your brain recorded, cached, and simply put on an infinite loop. It forces a really uncomfortable evaluation, honestly. If almost half of your day isn't actually a conscious choice, who or what is really at the steering wheel of your life?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this 40 to 45% statistic, Completely disrupts our traditional understanding of willpower and free will.
Oh, absolutely.
We all tend to walk around with this deep-seated assumption that we are highly rational agents. We believe we are constantly surveying our environment, weighing our options, and making deliberate, conscious choices in real time.
Right. We like to think of ourselves as the CEO of our own behavior, actively signing off on every single action.
But the reality that neuroscience reveals is more like finding out that half of your company's critical operations are being run by an automated software script that a disgruntled IT guy wrote 5 years ago.
And nobody in current management actually knows how to turn it off.
Exactly. The script just keeps running day in and day out, regardless of what the CEO wants.
Which is terrifying, honestly, but it also explains so much about human frustration.
It completely redefines why self-improvement is so difficult. I mean, we spend an enormous amount of time trying to willpower our way into better versions of ourselves.
We really do.
We try to use our conscious mind, that 55%, to force ourselves to eat healthier, exercise more, or be more patient with our families. But as we established earlier, willpower and conscious thought are incredibly energy-intensive processes. They drain the battery rapidly.
Yeah.
If you are only focusing on conscious effort and completely ignoring the 45% of your life that is being executed by automated scripts, you are fighting a losing battle. You are trying to outmuscle a biological conservation system that was designed by millions of years of evolution to be relentless.
Because the automated script doesn't get tired. It doesn't experience decision fatigue at 4.0 p.m.
Nope.
It doesn't need to read a motivational quote. It just executes the cached data.
The code runs whether you are energized, exhausted, inspired, or depressed. The basal ganglia doesn't care about your mood. It only cares about the trigger.
So because nearly half of our existence is governed by this tireless automated system, we are forced to confront the ultimate metric here. We can't just marvel at the biology. We have to evaluate the outcome.
We have to judge the behaviors.
Right. The text poses a crucial binary question regarding these automated behaviors. And it's a question you, listening right now, need to actively apply to your own routines. You have to ask yourself, are your habits helping you or controlling you?
It is the most vital diagnostic question we can ask about our own behavior.
So what does this all mean in practice? How do we actually run this diagnostic? I want you to mentally weigh your own morning routine against this metric. Think about the examples we explored earlier.
A coffee, the phone screen, the hygiene routines.
Exactly. Which side of the ledger do they fall on?
This raises an important question about the definitions of helping versus controlling, especially since we already established that the brain's machinery is morally neutral.
Right. It doesn't know good from bad.
The basal ganglia is completely blind to whether a behavioral loop is beneficial to your health or destructive to your goals.
The operating system just wants to save battery. It doesn't care if the background app is a helpful fitness tracker counting your steps or a malicious piece of malware silently stealing your data. It just runs the program.
That is the perfect way to frame it. A habit that helps you is a background app that perfectly aligns with the goals of your conscious mind.
Like the door lock.
Take the example of automatically locking your front door. Yeah. You don't stand on your porch every morning and mentally calculate the statistical probability of a home invasion versus the physical exertion required to turn the key.
No, your hand simply turns the lock while your mind is already moving on to the next task.
That is a habit working beautifully. It is securing your physical environment while demanding absolutely zero cognitive load. It is outsourcing a necessary function to the autopilot so your prefrontal cortex can focus on prepping for a morning presentation. That habit is helping you.
It is a utility app running seamlessly in the background.
But then we have to examine the other side of the binary, which are habits that are controlling you. This phenomenon occurs when the automated cached script directly conflicts with your current conscious desires.
But it happens anyway.
Yeah, the script is so deeply embedded in your basal ganglia that it simply overrides your higher level intentions.
This is the malware. This is the pop-up ad you can't close.
Let's go back to the social media example. Let's say your conscious 55% goal for the day is to wake up, be mindful, stretch, and start your morning with calm intention.
Sounds like a great morning.
You set that goal before you go to sleep. But the moment your eyes open, the visual trigger of the phone engages the 45%. Your hand reaches out, grabs the device, and opens the social media app before your conscious mind has even fully booted up to remind you of your goal.
Wow, yeah, you didn't actively decide to consume that content.
The automated script decided for you. In that specific moment, the habit is not a tool you are wielding to improve your life. You're simply the biological mechanism the habit is using to execute itself. That is the definition of a habit controlling you.
That is a deeply unsettling realization. Just the idea of being the mechanism rather than the operator. And knowing that this automated override accounts for roughly 45% of our daily actions means we could be inadvertently acting against our own interests for almost half of our waking hours.
Which is why understanding the neuroscience isn't enough. We have to apply a practical intervention to interrupt the system.
Yes, and we want to guide you through a very specific practical exercise from the source text to start disrupting these loops.
Yeah, we have to actually do something about it.
The goal here isn't to eliminate habits, since we know we'd mentally exhaust ourselves without them, but to audit them. You need to ask yourself directly, what habits am I repeating every single day without noticing?
The phrase "without noticing" is the critical identifier there. If you aren't noticing it, the basal ganglia is running it.
To run this audit, there are 3 necessary steps to disrupt the momentum. First, you have to intentionally pause. You have to create a physical and mental break in your routine.
You have to introduce friction into a frictionless loop.
Second, you have to think critically about your actions. You need to turn the high-energy spotlight of your prefrontal cortex back onto the mundane things you did today. Look for the actions that happened to you, rather than the actions you actively chose.
And the third step, which is absolutely non-negotiable if you want this to work, is to physically write them down.
Taking a pen to paper or typing them out, don't just mentally acknowledge a bad habit and let the thought drift away. But why is the physical act of documentation so critical to changing the neurological loop?
Because writing is inherently a conscious, deliberate, energy-burning act.
Ah, right.
When you identify a habit that has been operating invisibly in the dark, automated 45% of your brain, and you force yourself to articulate it, to structure it into language, and to physically record it on a page, you are effectively dragging that behavior kicking and screaming out of the basal ganglia and back into the conscious processing center of the prefrontal cortex.
You are forcing the system to delete the cached data and process the information raw all over again.
By making the invisible visible, you strip the habit of its automatic power. You simply cannot evaluate whether a script is a helpful utility app or a piece of controlling malware until you can look at the code objectively in front of you.
Makes total sense.
The sheer act of documentation is the first necessary step in reclaiming administrative access to your own behavior.
It forces you to actually look at the background processes so you can finally hit force quit on the ones draining your battery.
It requires a burst of cognitive energy to do this audit, which is precisely why your brain naturally resists doing it. But expending that energy is the only way to ensure that the 45% of your life spent on autopilot is actually navigating you toward a destination you want to reach.
So we challenge you to take a moment today, introduce that friction, pause, think, write them down, document the routines. Are they helping you optimize your energy, or are they quietly controlling your trajectory? It's a foundational audit of your daily reality.
You know, before we close this out, exploring the brain's relentless drive to conserve energy through automation leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to mull over.
Well, let's hear it.
We focus heavily on the mechanics of why it is so phenomenally difficult to break a bad habit, because the brain will always favor the frictionless, low-energy shortcut. But consider the inverse of that equation.
Okay.
If our neurological default is to instinctively avoid any action that requires a massive initial spike in conscious energy, how many incredible, life-changing, positive new behaviors are we completely avoiding simply because the upfront cognitive startup cost feels too exhausting to a brain that just wants to save battery?
Oh, wow. That reframes everything. We aren't just at risk of being trapped by the outdated legacy code we already have. We might be constantly locking ourselves out of the best versions of our future, simply because the installation process feels too tiring in the moment.
It's a compelling reason to push through that initial exhaustion the next time you try to build a new routine. The startup cost is high, but eventually the autopilot takes over.
What an incredible insight to end on. Well, that wraps up our exploration for today. We hope this deep dive has given you a powerful new framework for auditing the invisible scripts running your daily life. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.